Well, that was about as dominant as you could have asked for on an early Saturday kick. And Mizzou gets it done, goes to 3-0. Welcome to the Knee Jerk Reactions here. Andy Humphrey from The Big Show and KTGR. This is a video now instead of a column. Glad you're with us. And if you're listening back a little bit afterwards, glad that you're listening as well here on our YouTube channel or on any of our podcast platforms, on the KTGR app, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. This coming after Mizzou just flat out crushed Louisiana Lafayette, 52-10 at Furrow Field. It was technically a sellout. It had been announced as a sellout for, I think, several months now, but that wasn't necessarily the environment that we saw. It was very hot. And look, they moved the game up a little bit to try and avoid some of the really extreme heat that's supposed to come later this afternoon. Look, we'll get into that here in a few of these. But look, the takeaways are just Mizzou did exactly what teams of the caliber that they want to eventually rise to, this is what they do in these games. And again, we've been over this before. I think 2 weeks ago when Central Arkansas came to town and Mizzou dominated that game. Like, we've seen not so dominant performances from Mizzou in games against FCS opponents or group of five, technically now group of six. But this was not any kind of trouble. Mizzou, once again, scored on their opening drive, scored on their first four drives, I believe. Didn't punt for a while in the game, and ultimately came out with a comfortable, dominant victory. There were some moments that you kind of scratch your head and you're like, what was happening there? And I mean, we'll get into some of those, but you don't take that away from this. Take away from the fact that Mizzou was just completely top to bottom, overpowering an inferior opponent. And look, I'm kind of glad that they got that over with sooner than maybe they expected to with the moved up game time. So we'll get into all of that here, the knee-jerk reactions. Not too many to talk about really just for this game specifically, but we'll kind of look ahead to what's going to be a monster matchup next Saturday night when the Tigers host South Carolina, who is set to play later on tonight. And again, we don't know the result of that, so we'll see what ramifications there are from that as they take on Vanderbilt. But first, let's get to this. Ahmad Hardy, man. This is the type of running back that you were envisioning when he signed on to transfer to Mizzou. You envisioned him just dragging tacklers with him, which is what he literally did in this game a few times. And look, 22 carries, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns. He averages 11.5 a carry. It's only the 7th time that a Mizzou player has gotten to 250 yards rushing. I believe it was Devin West who did it twice. Then it was I'm going out of order, but Henry Josie's in there, Tyler Beatty's in there, Brad Smith is in there, and Tony Temple. Those were the others that did it. And then the 2 from Devin West, those were the previous 6. Ahmad Hardy in some pretty good company now, only 3 games into his Mizzou tenure. Look, this is the competition that he was facing. You can't apologize for that. Look, when that happens, you still find it very notable, especially with the way that Mizzou ran the football today. Like, it wasn't just Ahmad Hardy. Yes, he dazzled, and he had broken tackle after broken tackle, broke off that 71-yard touchdown run. That just makes you chuckle whenever you see it. You're just like, he's playing on a different level than every other defender on the field. But it was a collective effort here from Mizzou to get the rushing attack success that they had. I mean, they got 400 yards rushing in this game, 427 to be exact. Marquise Davis rushed for over 100 yards in this contest. 20 carries for 113. That's over 5.5 a carry. Look, you also kind of take that with a grain of salt of like, okay, that's Louisiana. But like, I'm more encouraged by that because Marquise Davis is all in all stepping up in competition himself. The last really competitive games that he had, I'm sure when he was carrying it 20 times in a game, was in high school. And this is a step up from that still. It'll be a bit more of a ramp-up period for a true freshman like that. But when he takes an opportunity and runs with it, quite literally, in that fashion, got in the end zone, I believe, for the first time in his career. I don't think he got in against Central Arkansas. I may be wrong on that. But 113 yards, I know it was in mop-up duty mostly, but Louisiana, their defenders are still trying to prove themselves in those areas too. They're still giving their best effort. Marquise Davis did also, and it pretty well worked out for Mizzou to keep things going there. And look, everyone who ran the football did pretty well with it. Jamal Roberts didn't run as much today, 8 carries, 46. Bo Prabula had a few runs here. He had a 14-yard run, some sack yardage, takes his rushing total down a little bit. Even Brett Brown, the quarterback, the third-string quarterback, if you will, I guess for now, behind Matt Zauer's got a run in there, a 5-yard pickup. So, look, there was really no issue with Mizzou's offense today because they just decided, you know what, it's hot. These pellets are burning up hotter and hotter as we get to. I believe after the game, Eli Drinkwitz said with the whole the thermometer and the turf deal, that the ground temp was around like 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Like, man, when that's the case, you run the football a few times, you bleed out the clock, you overpower your opponent, and you just get out of Dodge, like with everybody intact as much as possible. And I think for the most part, Mizzou did that. And so the rushing attack for Mizzou collectively. But look, Ahmad Hardy was the main key to that. It wasn't just how well Mizzou blocked, because I think they did run block really well today. Ahmad Hardy added to it with his explosive ability to break tackles, stiff arm guys, stay balanced, and ultimately put together a 250-yard day. That's impressive, no matter who you're facing. And he said afterward, UL Monroe last year lost to Lafayette, and so he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder in that game. So a little extra motivation for one Ahmad Hardy. That's good to see. The total domination also continued on the defensive side. I mean, they led up a big run. I get it. 84-yard touchdown run. I believe it was Zywan Perry was the one for Louisiana that had the big run there. Fine. You still only give up a total of 121 yards. 84 of them came on that one play. So you're talking for the other 35 plays that Lafayette ran, they had less than 40 yards of offense. I don't think I've ever seen in a college football game 4 total passing yards for a team, essentially. Lafayette could not pass the ball to save their lives. Just both quarterbacks just seemed overwhelmed. Daniel Beal and Lunch Winfield, I mean, just the Hall of Fame name, of course. It was lunchtime, but lunchtime wasn't really all that fruitful either in the passing game. He was 1 of 6 for -1 yards passing. Beal was 1 of 8 for 5 yards net. That's complete domination from the defense. Look, they are clearly the better opponent, but we've seen time and again more talented Mizzou teams go up against inferior opponents and let up a bunch of big plays. They didn't today, especially not in the passing game. 1 rushing touchdown on an 84-yard run. If you're creating an all-or-nothing type of situation for an offense, you'll take that, especially when Mizzou's got the talent edge. They might face a similar type of offense against South Carolina next week, or at least what we've seen from South Carolina so far. They've been relying on a lot of explosive plays themselves to keep on schedule. That'll at least be the first real test, I think, for what Mizzou's defense can show on tape. I think last week, clearly they did an excellent job of stopping the run against Kansas, but left themselves maybe a little too susceptible to those big plays over the top. Going to be interesting how they play Lenora Sellers then from that angle, because he's the same type of quarterback, but I think a step up in talent level from what Mizzou was facing a week ago. So that is now the challenge, I think, is that you look at what maybe was a little weak in this game. You realize that South Carolina is going to try and nitpick. They're going to try and nitpick the Kansas game. And you got to be ready for Sellers essentially to maybe carry the load for them. We'll see for sure. But in the end, you don't have any complaints about the defense and 4 passing yards. don't complain about that. That is just unreal from what Mizzou was able to do defensively. And again, when you outgain a team 606 to 121 in total offense, like it seemed that Mizzou committing penalties was really the best way that the Raging Cajuns could really move the chains in this game, because they only had 4 first downs in total. Mizzou had 32. Yeah, that's kind of how it went. Look, they were dominant except for 2 plays. And the one of the plays was the 84-yard run. The other one was probably the interception that Bo Prabula had. They were deep in there, inside the 20, 15, maybe even their 10. They had benefited from an offside penalty where Prabula saw that he had a free play, decided to maybe take a gamble in the middle of the field. It wasn't picked, it was tipped away, but they got another chance at it 5 yards closer after the offside penalty. And then he tries something similar. He's a little under pressure, and he throws it to the left side. And I think the DB just makes a really good play, tips it to himself essentially to make the pick. Yeah, you can maybe nitpick and say, Bo Prabula, okay, that's the one key mistake that he's made, or not necessarily even key, because Mizzou still dominated this game. They were in no trouble of losing this game. Honestly, the mistake that hurt Mizzou the most that Bo Prabula has made through 3 games was the fumble last week against Kansas. And that also was, one where he quickly learned from. He's like, I got to maybe just slide next time, try not to put the ball at risk in those situations. And even then, it bounced perfectly into the Kansas guy's lap, and he runs it in with a free lane for a touchdown. Like, those things will happen over the course of a college football season. You try to flush it and move on. This is kind of the same thing. It hurt them even less. This was when Lafayette was still struggling on offense. I think the only first down they had at that point was via penalty, and they start in field goal range, but Mizzou keeps them out of the end zone, and they have to settle for a kick there. So that's really the only damage done. You won by 42 points instead of 45. Like, move on. You obviously he will look at it after the game, see what was off from that particular play, and go from there. But you're talking about a dominant type performance from one Ahmad Hardy, from several other guys, and ultimately the best that we've seen, I think, Mizzou from top to bottom play in a game so far this year. So that's the good part about that. Now, look, there's not too many takeaways from this. It was exactly what you expect from Mizzou to do for a game here. The question now is, will all of this work for Mizzou's first conference matchup against South Carolina at home? Going to be a raucous environment, going to be a night game. We don't know if it's 6 or 6:30 yet, but we'll find out soon. I mean, maybe a lot of this depends on what South Carolina does against Vanderbilt, and we'll see what happens with that. But in the end, I think you don't see anything that's discouraging for what Mizzou might be able to do in a game like that. They have faced Lenora Sellers before, and they almost had him beat. They're very close to going to the other Columbia and getting a signature win last year. I'm sure the players that were in that situation a year ago feel a bitter taste in their mouth to try and get back at the Gamecocks for a game that was really just taken away from their hands right at the very end, which was a little bit of their own doing, obviously. On defense, they just could not make the play to stop the final heave, essentially, not necessarily the literal heave, but just the final chance that South Carolina had to get a game-winning touchdown there. And so the defense, I'm sure, is going to be most motivated to make a win happen, to play better than they did against Sellers that last time out. And let's be honest, again, maybe things change tonight when they play Vanderbilt and they look really good on offense, and they've maybe been saving stuff to make sure that their conference opponents don't get a lot of tape on them for what they actually want to do. And they were just able to get by Virginia Tech by the skin of their teeth with that sort of mindset, and then also South Carolina State maybe slow starting when they started that game. But I think in the end, Mizzou still will have to find ways to balance their defensive approach. You've got to stop the run, obviously. You can't let Lenora Sellers out and let him weave through your defense like he did at times in that game. Got to try and play him a little bit like you did Jalen Daniels a week ago. But then what does that mean for over the top? Because if Sellers is able to complete some of those passes, I think they have more of an ability to hurt you on the scoreboard than maybe Kansas did with those chances that they had a week ago. I think South Carolina's attack is going to be a little bit better equipped to punish more of those mistakes that you have in coverage, or calls that you maybe shouldn't be in, scheme that you're not in. Drinkwitz has mentioned earlier this week that they wanted to make sure there wasn't too much scheme going forward with some of their defensive calls as a root cause for maybe what didn't go well against Kansas defensively. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach that. Offensively, I mean, you do have to still protect. There were maybe a few offensive line, I think, had a good game. I think they once again took a step forward from the week prior. I mean, when you amass 427 rushing yards, you don't have a bad day for the offensive line. That's a really good day. Maybe the criticism is that in a few areas in pass protection, Bo Pribula was left a little too susceptible to some hits, but I think that was more due to Louisiana finding ways to bring pressure. They brought it at some key times that maybe allowed them to get to Pribula a little bit sooner than Mizzou obviously would have wanted. Of course, there was one play where Pribula barely was going down for a sack, and then he just muscles it over to Jamal Roberts, and Roberts runs in for a touchdown. That won't happen against your tougher opponents. It could happen today, but Mizzou's going to have to be more careful going forward with how they protect Pribula. But I think that was more due to the fact that Louisiana just had a few more all-out blitz opportunities and just decided, you know what, enough's enough. Let's try and get Pribula to the ground. I don't know how many times an opposing defense might do that, because the more and more Pribula sees that, I think the more he's going to essentially collect as far as info on how to get out of those situations. And an SEC defense will not allow him enough chances to throw over the top, make the right decision when facing a blitz. He has mostly been able to handle those situations very well. So I don't know how many times South Carolina might bring a blitz on Pribula in that game, but they do have some very strong defenders up front. They have a very formidable pass rush that they brought guys back from last season with, and so Mizzou's going to have to be ready for that. They might have to be ready for a four-man rush that is stronger than most four-man rushes. Will they be ready for it? We did see a little bit of rotation today on the right guard spot. Curtis Piegler and Tristan Wilson kind of changing in and out. So maybe that's something to monitor as they head into this game. But again, I don't have too many concerns about it. I would actually pick today Mizzou to win the game. I didn't pick that at the beginning of the season. I thought they would lose this game before they actually started the year. But from what I've seen so far with how they've handled their business, especially on the offensive side, I actually think they can get it done. Be interesting to see who opens as a favorite in that game as well. The only other thing, I would have liked to see maybe a few more chances for Robert Meyer. I know the game script didn't necessarily dictate it. He had a chance from, I think, about 34 yards to put one through. He converted that. There was a 41-yarder that he missed wide right. I think later in the game, I think it was fourth quarter, Mizzou had a 4th and 1. They were just inside their 30. It would have been a longer field goal, and that was maybe a chance where I would have maybe let him go out there. But Eli Drinkwitz has been adamant that he doesn't want to kill the confidence of the true freshman kicker. So maybe the one downside is that he probably didn't get enough reps from about 35 plus that you would have liked to see. But, we'll see. I think he clearly has the range. Accuracy might be the question. Obviously, he had enough distance to make the 41-yarder, but just, pushed it to the right a little bit. Again, he's going to get more chances, but still interesting to see how Mizzou will play that part of their offense based on his inexperience. Not to say that he can't get the job done. We just haven't seen it quite yet. All right. Well, that's really all about the game. Now just about what people might have been complaining about with the change of the time. I saw a lot of, well, why not play this at 6 or 7? Because you're trying to avoid the heat. Isn't it supposed to be less hot at night? Well, theoretically, air temperature for sure, but two things. One, that doesn't mean that the turf temperature changes. It still will collect a whole lot of heat, and that takes a lot longer to cool down than maybe the air temperature and how everybody feels in the stadium. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is that, look, if you moved it back to 6, that means the players are heading out onto the field. That doesn't mean they're heading out onto the field at 6. No, they're heading out there at 3:34, getting their pre-warm-ups in and everything like that, and then heading out for another warm-up in pads, and then back and forth while you're operating at the hottest time of day. And that's when the turf will be at its very hottest. So you have to avoid that part of it too, but you wouldn't be if you were moving the kick back to a night kick. I think this was the best that they could have done to try and avoid the heat as much as possible. And yeah, it was still kind of hot, but you limited the major concern area as much as possible. You certainly couldn't play at 3, like you were going to be out there for certain from start to finish, from warm up to walking off the field during absolutely scorching hot times of day. So try to move the warm-up period a little bit sooner to the morning where it's not as bad. And then, towards the end of the game, guys are going to be gassed a little bit easier because it gets a little bit hotter. The turf takes on more heat. And you saw that at the end of the game. Like, run, get the clock down. That was Drinkwitz mentioned how he maybe wanted to get Matt Zowers more chances to pass the ball, but I think it was the right decision to just say, look, let's run it a bunch, limit possessions, limit time stoppages, and just get out of here. Make sure nobody else gets hurt or no one else gets dehydrated, anything like that. I think they handled it about as well as it could. It was interesting to see noon instead of 11. I don't know exactly what the difference would have been there. My guess, and it's not really that educated of one, but the thing that maybe pops to mind for me is that maybe the SEC stepped in and said, well, we don't want too many games kicking off right at 11 a.m. because we don't want to split the eyeballs and the attention too many different ways. I think that's kind of why a couple of years ago they decided to make some 11:45 start times for the SEC network, stagger it a little bit. I think that's maybe what caused the noon instead of the 11 a.m., which is what we're used to seeing. But look, in the end, I also feel that for games like this, man, just get them over with as soon as possible. I get that you want to have night games, and that makes a lot of sense, and it drives a lot of attention, and it gets fans more excited, no doubt. And next week's going to be electric with South Carolina coming in, and Mizzou, I'm sure, is going to create an awesome environment for it at night, and I can't wait to see it. Games like this, though, when you kind of know the outcome going in, just get them over with as soon as possible. Now you can avoid, again, the hottest time of day. Louisiana can get home sooner. I'm sure they would want to get out of Columbia as soon as possible with the beatdown that they took. No offense to them. It's just how it went, unfortunately for them. So I'm sure they want to just get out as soon as possible. And in the end, it's better for fans, I think, too. Like, okay, you saw the first half, and now you can go on with the rest of your day. And that's what a lot of fans did today, and that's fine. So I have no issues with the kick time. Obviously, I'm a little biased. I like early kicks anyway. It gets me home sooner. But, look, it was completely no issue with me on moving the kick time up instead of back for this game. Well, thanks for joining us again. The Knee Jerk Reactions here after Mizzou beats down Louisiana 52-10. We will have more reaction on the big show from 4 to 6 on Monday on KTGR. It streams right here on YouTube as well if you are listening. It also is on our podcast page if you're listening to that. So join myself and Brendan Schaefer as we break more of this game down, and we look forward to the monster matchup coming up in Columbia, Missouri this upcoming weekend between Mizzou and South Carolina. Should be a lot of fun. Hope you join us for it. Thanks for listening and watching the Knee Jerk Reactions here on our YouTube channel.